The train wheezed to a halt with a mechanical groan, expelling steam into the late afternoon heat. Dust billowed up around the wooden platform of what barely qualified as a station. Sun-bleached sign crookedly read, Red Hollow Junction. And beside it, one man dozed on a bench, boots propped up on his battered suitcase. The rest of the town, or what remained of it, seemed to have long forgotten the purpose of waiting. Lila Pearson stepped down from the train slowly, her gloved hands gripping the handle of a small trunk. Her dress, ivory lace stitched lovingly by her own fingers, had dulled in the soot-filled air of the journey. The hem dragged in the red dirt, her veil pulled back and pinned with a brass comb. Her face, mostly turned from the curious stares of the train's few remaining passengers, was carefully angled beneath the brim of a wide hat dot. She had not expected a welcome party. But she had expected. Someone got with each click of her heels on the wooden planks. Hope began to crumble in her chest. A boy passed her by carrying mail. An old woman chewed tobacco and spat without glancing her way. No one held a sign with her. Name. No eager suitor waited with flowers or trembling anticipation. She stood alone, a blot of delicate white in the otherwise earth-toned scape. Behind her, the conductor shouted last calls. The doors closed. The wheels shrieked. The train pulled. Away with a mournful sigh, abandoning her like a cruel punchline. The dust settled again. Silence returned. Lila turned toward the small station office, where a window hung half open. Behind the dusty pane sat a man with spectacles, looking over a ledger. She stepped forward, her voice quiet but resolute. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for a Mr. Tobias Henley. He was meant to meet me here." The man blinked up at her, adjusted his glasses, and furrowed his brow. "You Lila Pearson?" She nodded. Her throat tightened. Something in his expression warned her before he said the words. He sent a wire 2 days back. Said he wasn't able to make it. No further instructions. Her breath caught. She didn't speak. The man, shifting uncomfortably, scratched the back of his neck. "Sorry, miss. That's all I got." The conversation ended there. She turned slowly, willing her legs to remain steady as she walked away. Her eyes burned, but tears did not fall. Not yet. She sat on the edge of the platform, gripping her trunk like a life raft, staring out at the empty stretch of land that rippled in heat and silence. The wind tugged at her veil. A tumbleweed drifted by lazily, as if mocking the weight in her chest, not coming. 3 words, flat and final. Not even enough syllables to break a heart, and yet here she was sick with it. She had known this was a possibility. A risk taken when Tobias first answered her letter from the matrimonial column. He had written kindly, said he didn't care what she looked like, that he'd been through the war and seen enough ruin not to flinch from a little scarring, that he longed for companionship more than beauty. He even sent a photograph, broad shoulders, sandy hair, a stiff but gentle smile. She believed him, believed in his words, in the possibility that someone might love her for more than the smooth half of her face. Now, under the relentless heat, her dreams peeled like old wallpaper. Lila unpinned her hat, letting it fall into her lap. The disfigured side of her face was finally exposed, pale, twisted flesh pulling at the corner of her mouth, one eyebrow permanently arched by the fire that had stolen part of her childhood. She waited for a reaction from the man on the bench, but he only glanced once, then looked away. That was worse than staring not. She inhaled slowly. The air smelled of iron and old wood. She ran her fingers over the smooth part of her cheek, then the rough. She whispered, barely audible, "I came anyway." The day sank slowly into late afternoon. Shadows stretched long. The station grew quieter. She hadn't moved. Behind her, the station agent emerged with a mug of coffee and a weary voice. "Next." Train back east. Don't leave till Thursday, miss. 3 days. 3 nights. She nodded without looking up. Thank you. He hesitated. You got somewhere to stay? No, she said. He didn't ask more. As dusk fell, she rose and moved to the edge of the platform, settling on her trunk. The horizon glowed with fading fire, streaks of gold and rust dragging across, the sky like bruises. The silence was nearly sacred, until it wasn't. Hoofbeats, slow, steady. The crunch of gravel under hooves. She turned. A man on horseback approached from the dirt road. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face. His silhouette was tall, lean, familiar in a way that wasn't comforting. His horse was a paint-strong, patient, eyes steady like its rider. He stopped a few yards from her and dismounted with a quiet grunt. A slight limp affected his gait, but he moved with practiced ease. The man looked at her trunk, then at her, then tipped his hat slowly. Evenin'. Miss. She nodded. He had a deep, gravelly voice, weathered, not unkind. You waiting for someone? He asked. Lila didn't answer at first. She studied him. He had a scar along his jaw, running down into the neck of his shirt. One side of his face was scruffed with beard. His eyes were hard to read in the twilight. I was, she said finally. He gave a slight nod, glancing toward the empty station. Not coming? He asked. No, she said. The man shifted his weight. Well, that makes 2 of us. Her brow furrowed. He chuckled without smiling. Town was supposed to pay me for a job. Rode all the way here for a lie. Turns out the sheriff's office burned down last month. She almost smiled. Almost. Funny world, he added. Full of missing people and empty promises. She looked down at her gloves. What happens next, then? The man shrugged. Next, you figure out if you're going back where you came from, or forward into something else. She turned to look at him fully. And which are you doing? He squinted at the horizon. I ain't decided yet. He glanced at her trunk again, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. Held it out. She hesitated before taking it. The water was warm but clean. Thank you, she murmured. The man studied her, not in the way others had. Not lingering on the scars, not flinching. He saw the whole of her. She felt it. He tipped his head. Name's Wes Calder. She hesitated. Lila. Just Lila? She nodded. The rest doesn't matter anymore. He accepted that with a small tilt of his chin. Then, after a pause, you got a place to stay? No, she said again. He didn't rush. Didn't offer anything yet. Just stood beside his horse, thoughtful. Well, I know a place not far from here. It's quiet. Empty most days. Old ranch house. I camp out there when I'm passing through. She waited. I'm not offering a promise, he added. Just a place to sleep, till you figure things? Still, she hesitated. She was alone, abandoned, and the night would not be kind. But this man, this stranger, had offered her water. And something softer. Respect. I don't have much, she said. I don't need much, he replied. Lila rose slowly, lifted her trunk. Wes stepped forward, took it from her hands without ceremony, and loaded it onto the back of his horse. She mounted behind him, carefully, unsure of where to place her hands. He reached back and guided them to his waist. Hang on, he said. Just like that, they rode away from the edge of nowhere. Neither knew what lay ahead. But for the first time that day, Layla didn't feel like something forgotten. She felt seen. And that, she thought, might be the beginning of everything. The moon rode high above them, silver and indifferent, casting pale light across the wild land. The night air smelled of sage and horse sweat. Lila kept her hands loosely around Wes Calder's waist as they rode, her thoughts running faster than the horse beneath them. The steady rhythm of hooves offered a strange comfort. There was no conversation, just the sound of breath, wind, and the occasional snort from the paint gelding that carried them westward. She'd never ridden behind a man before. She'd never imagined doing it this way. Veil discarded, heart bruised, body stiff from hours of waiting. Yet, even in the strange silence, something in Wes's presence kept the weight of shame at bay. He didn't look back at her. He didn't flinch when she spoke. He simply let her be. After nearly an hour, a dark shape emerged from the landscape, a weather-beaten shack nestled beside a dry creek bed, its porch slumped and roof missing a few shingles. Wes dismounted first, then helped her down with a hand. Back was calloused but gentle. His scar caught the moonlight as he looked at her. Neither spoke. Inside, the cabin smelled of dry wood and dust. A fire had been built once days ago, maybe. Wes lit a lantern, its golden glow making shadows dance along the walls. Lila set her trunk down in a corner, suddenly uncertain of where to stand. She felt foreign in this man's world, yet oddly safer than she'd felt anywhere else in years. "You can take the cot," Wes said, nodding toward the back corner. "It's got a blanket. Not much, but it's clean." "Where will you sleep?" she asked. He shrugged and pulled a rolled canvas from beneath a table. "Floor's always treated me just fine." She hesitated, wanting to protest, but thought better of it. He'd already offered more than anyone in her life had in a long time. The fire was rekindled with a few practice strikes. As warmth spread through the room, Lila sat on the edge of the cot and removed her gloves. Her fingers were stiff, her palms sweating. She watched him move around the room, methodical and quiet. He poured water into a tin mug and offered it to her. "You've done this before?" she said, taking it. "What?" "Brought strangers into your cabin." Wes chuckled softly. "Strangers don't usually make it this far out." She sipped, then set the mug down. "Then why me?" He met her eyes, his face unreadable for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Because you looked like someone who'd forgotten what safety feels like." Her chest tightened. She didn't reply. Silence stretched between them, but not uncomfortably. The fire popped. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance. She lay back on the cot, a worn mattress sagging beneath her. She stared at the ceiling and listened to Wes's quiet movements as he unrolled his bedroll near the door. He didn't ask her any questions. Not about the wedding dress, the scar on her cheek, or the man who didn't show. For that alone she felt something shift inside her dot in the morning. Dawn broke in hues of gold and coral. Lila awoke to the smell of coffee and the crackle of firewood. Wes sat at the small table, staring out the open door, one hand loosely holding a tin cup. He looked different in daylight, less shadowed, more human. The scar on his jaw didn't soften, but something in his posture did. She rose, smoothing her wrinkled dress. He offered her a cup without turning his head. "Sleep all right?" "Better than I thought I would," she admitted. He nodded. "A beat." "Past. Do you mind if I ask you something?" she said, wrapping her hands around the warm metal dot. He gestured for her to go on. "Why do you live out here, alone?" Wes was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Because it's easier to be alone than to be reminded of what you've lost every day." "What did you lose?" His gaze didn't shift. "Parts of myself. A brother. A piece of my face. Trust." Layla swallowed. "You were in the war?" He nodded once. "Fought at Shiloh, then in Missouri. Made it out, barely. Some of me stayed behind." She looked at his scar. It made sense now. Not just the mark, but the way he moved, the stillness he carried. "Did you come out here to forget?" He finally turned to look at her. "No, I came out here to remember the man I used to be. Haven't found him yet." Her fingers tightened. "On the cup, maybe you're not supposed to." Maybe not. They sat in silence again. This time she broke it. I was burned when I was 8. Stove exploded. Half my face went with it. I've worn veils ever since. He didn't blink. Didn't look away. I used to think if someone could just see past it, if they could see me, I might matter again. So I wrote letters. Tobias wrote back. Said he'd take me as I was. And he didn't. She shook her head. Wes leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking. Then he was never worthy of you. The words hit her like a river's rush unexpected. Overwhelming. Her throat closed, her eyes wet. She turned her face to the window, ashamed of the tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" He asked gently. "For crying, for being stupid, for thinking someone could ever call me beautiful again." He stood slowly, stepped toward her. She kept her gaze down. She felt the rough pads of his fingers tilt her chin. She didn't resist. "I've seen men call gold beautiful, cities, women who wouldn't last a week out here. But you," he searched her face, voice low and steady. "You rode a train across the country with nothing but hope and a heart stitched together by letters. That's braver than any man I ever rode with." Her breath trembled. "I don't need to know the other side of your face," he continued, "because I see you. All of you." She didn't know what to say. So she DIDN single quotes T. Later that day, they rode into town together. It wasn't much, just a row of storefronts, a dusty saloon, and a church with a tilted cross. People looked when they rode in. Some stared. One child pointed at Lila's face until his mother tugged him away, but Wes didn't flinch. He stayed at her side. When a man spat and muttered something cruel under his breath, Wes turned with such quiet menace that the man stepped back and disappeared inside the bar dot at the general store. Lila waited outside while Wes picked up supplies. She sat on the porch rail, watching the wind stir dust devils in the street. She should have felt shame, but instead there was a strange defiance building in her chest. She had survived so much. And here she was, scars and all still standing. Wes emerged, carrying a sack of flour, a box of cartridges, and a coil of rope. He set them in the saddlebags, then turned to her. "Got something else," he said. From his coat pocket, he pulled a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to her. "What is it?" she asked. He shrugged. "Open it." Inside was a hand mirror, plain, unadorned, but polished. She looked at it, then at him. "I thought maybe it's time you saw what I see," he said. She held it up, but only briefly. The scars were there, unchanged. But her eyes, there was something steadier in them now. They rode back in silence. And when they reached the cabin again, she helped him unpack. That night, they ate beans by the fire, and Wes told her a story about a mule that once kicked him into a river. She laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in months. He watched her, a crooked grin lifting his scarred jaw. "I like that sound," he said. She blushed. "I'd forgotten how it felt. You should do it more." "I might." As night deepened and the fire wore down to coals, she looked at him across the room and said, "Do you think two broken people can make something whole?" Wes met her gaze. "I think broken people are the only ones who know how to build something that lasts." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight she felt something bloom quietly in her chest, something strong, stubborn, and alive. Hope. And that was enough to carry her forward. The wind that rolled down from the hills that morning felt different, cooler, tenser. It whispered warnings through the grass and stirred the thin layer of dust coating the cabin's porch. Lila sat on the steps, weaving a threadbare cloth between her fingers. Her scars caught the light, yet for once she didn't reach for a veil. Wes had told her not to hide, and more importantly, had made her believe she didn't have to. Inside, Wes was sharpening his knife. His eyes kept flicking toward the window. The quiet that usually calmed him now made him restless. Something in the stillness didn't sit right. He could feel it in his bones, the itch that came before a storm or blood. Lila watched him through the open door, her voice soft but steady. "You're expecting something?" He didn't look up. Maybe someone. She frowned, setting the cloth aside. "Wes?" He exhaled slowly and sheathed the knife. "You ever hear of the Red Ridge Boys?" "No," she said. "Outlaws. Mean ones. Rode with them a lifetime ago. Back before I figured out what kind of man I didn't want to be." He finally met her eyes. "They think I'm dead." Lila's stomach twisted. "Why would they think that?" "Because I made sure." "I did." Wes walked to the table, poured water into a tin cup, and took a long drink. His jaw was tight, movements precise, like a soldier preparing for something inevitable. "I turned on them," he continued, "during a raid near Kansas. They were going to burn a church. With women and kids inside, I stopped them. Took a bullet for it. They left me in a ditch, bleeding out." He smiled without warmth. "Didn't die. But I buried the man they used to ride with." Lila rose, stepping closer. "Do they know you're here?" "Doubt it. But Red Hollow's not far from their old roots. Word gets around. All it takes is one drunk, one unlucky sighting." She put her hand on his arm. "What will you do if they find me?" He said, then paused. "Finish what I started." "Before." She could answer. A shot rang out in the distance, sharp, distinct. Not thunder, not an accident. Dot Wes was already moving. He grabbed his rifle from behind the door, loaded it in practiced movements. His face shifted at every trace of warmth, wiped away, replaced by cold calculation. "Lila, listen to me. You take your trunk. You go out the back and down the creek bed. There's a hollow about half a mile out. Stay low. Don't make a sound." Her chest tightened. "I'm not leaving you." "This isn't a choice," he said sharply. "They don't care who gets in their way." She didn't move. Her hands were trembling. "I'm not hiding," she said. Wes cursed under his breath. "You don't know what they're capable of." "Maybe not," she said, chin lifting. "But I know what I am. I'm not a burden. I'm not something to be tucked away. You taught me that." Another shot cracked through the trees, closer this time. He looked at her, his expression torn. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right. But you stay behind me." They moved outside. The sun was already high, casting everything in harsh light. Across the ridge, 3 riders appeared, dust trailing behind them like ghosts. Wes squinted, rifle in hand. "That's them." Lila stood just behind him, her breath shallow. She could see the lead rider clearly now, long coat, black hat. "Eyes like knives. Duke Morrow," Wes muttered. Still ugly as ever. The riders slowed as they approached the cabin. Duke stopped his horse just shy of shouting distance. "Wes Calder," he called. "Heard a whisper you were alive. Figured I'd come see for myself." Wes stepped forward, rifle steady. "I buried Wes Calder." "That man's gone." Duke laughed, a sound like gravel grinding under boot. "That so? Then I guess I'll be introducing myself to a ghost." "You got no business here," Wes said. "Got unfinished business," Duke replied, tilting his head. "You took something from us. Left us weak. That's gotta be repaid." Layla stepped into view. Duke's gaze shifted, his grin twisting. "Well now, who's this?" "None of your concern," Wes said. "She your woman?" Duke asked. "She's got a look about her. That half-face thing. Reminds me of a porcelain doll. Someone sat too close to the fire." Wes's jaw clenched. "One more word, Duke. One more." Duke chuckled. "Still got fire, then? Good. Makes this more fun." He raised a hand. The two men behind him began to circle, splitting to either side of the cabin. "Get ready," Wes whispered. Lila nodded. Her heart was pounding, but her fingers found the pistol tucked in her skirt, a gift from Wes, just in case. The standoff didn't last long. Gunfire erupted in a flash. Wes fired first, hitting the rider on the left in the shoulder. The man spun off his horse, screaming. Lila ducked as bullets tore into the porch. Wes moved like he'd done it 100 times, quick and deadly. He shot again, hitting the second man in the leg. Duke fired twice, missing. Then he spurred his horse forward. Wes met him halfway. They clashed in a burst of dust and fists, rifles forgotten. Lila stood frozen for a moment, then ran toward the injured man crawling for his gun. Her hands trembled, but she lifted the pistol. "Don't," she said. He paused, eyes wide. "I will shoot," she warned. He dropped the weapon. A few feet away, Wes and Duke were trading blows. Duke was stronger, but Wes fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Blood splattered across the dry ground. Duke tackled Wes, slamming him into the dirt. Lila didn't think. She raised the pistol, aimed, and fired. The shot struck Duke in the side. He stumbled, cursed, and turned toward her. Wes surged up and drove his fist into Duke's jaw. The outlaw dropped, unconscious. Silence fell. Lila lowered the pistol, her arms shaking. Wes limped toward her, blood on his shirt, but smiling faintly. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak. He touched her cheek, gently. "I told you to stay behind me, and I told you I wouldn't hide." They dragged the two wounded men into the barn, tied them up, bound their wounds. Wes watched Duke's chest rise and fall, then looked at Lila. "Law's thin out here," he said. "We ride them into town tomorrow. Let the sheriff sort it." She nodded. "Then what?" "Then we decide if we stay or go." That night, they sat by the fire again. Both bruised, both changed. Lila's hands were stained with dust and smoke, but her shoulders were straighter. "You didn't hesitate," Wes said. "I did," she replied. "But then I remembered who I was before, and I didn't want to be her anymore." He smiled, lopsided, broken, and beautiful. "You saved my life. You saved mine first." The fire crackled. The stars above them watched in silence. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Lila said softly, "You think they'll come back?" "They always do. And when they do, we'll be ready." He reached for her hand. She took it. Wounded souls, both of them, but not alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to heal. Dawn came like a promise, soft and slow, across the wounded earth. A fire had long since died, but its warmth lingered in the embers and in the silence between them. Lila stirred first, stretching the stiffness from her limbs. Her hand brushed against Wes's where it lay on the blanket between them, their fingers barely touching. The feel of skin against skin was no longer something to flinch from. It was a quiet reminder that they were still here, still breathing, still whole enough to move forward. Wes blinked awake beneath the fading stars. His body ached from bruises earned the day before, but he didn't complain. Pain, he'd come to learn, was sometimes just proof you'd survived. He turned his head to look at Lila, her face lit by the pale glow of morning, her features calm, but alert. Her scarred cheek caught the light and didn't hide from it. "They'll ride us out of here if they know who you are," she said. "They already know," he replied. "What matters now is what we do with the time we've got." Outside, the land waited. The cabin stood silent behind them, its door swinging lazily in the wind. The two outlaws lay still in the barn, bound and gagged, left with enough water to keep them alive. Their horses had been untied, but not led far. It was up to Wes and Lila to decide what happened next. "We should leave," Lila said, not with fear but certainty. He nodded. "We can't stay in one place too long." She didn't ask where they'd go. She didn't need to. She just started gathering supplies. Wes followed, slow in his movements, careful with the bruised ribs and stitched wound on his shoulder. There were no declarations, no grand speeches, just two people moving in rhythm, packing what little they had with the silent understanding that the road would be hard, but not impossible. By midday, the paint gelding was saddled, and Lila's trunk strapped behind the saddle. She looked at it for a long time before brushing her hand over the brass handle. "I carried that thing across half the country," she said with a dry smile. "It's the only piece of the old me I brought along." Wes mounted the horse, then reached down to help her up. She hesitated for just a breath, then took his hand. Her fingers curled around his like roots finding soil. They rode south through the hills, the wind tugging at their clothes, the sun burning high above. The world was wide, and for the first time, Lila felt it wasn't closing in on her. She sat straighter in the saddle. Her veil stayed in the trunk. And when they passed travelers on the road, two men on a wagon and a woman tending goats, she didn't hide. Some looked. One stared, but none of it mattered. Wes noticed it too. He said nothing, but the pride in his eyes was enough. By nightfall, they reached a creek and made camp beneath a cluster of cottonwoods. Wes built a fire while Lila prepared food from their sparse supplies: salted meat, half a loaf of bread, a few shriveled apples. It wasn't much, but it filled the silence between them with something that felt like care. "I used to dream of being saved," Lila said, once they'd finished eating. "Of some man coming to take me away from everything. I thought if someone could look past my scars, I'd finally be whole." She turned her face toward the flames. "But it wasn't the world's eyes I needed to change. It was mine." Wes poked at the fire with a stick. "You're more whole than anyone I've ever known." She gave a soft laugh. "You say that like you believe it." "I do." The flames danced between them, casting shifting shadows on their faces. He looked at her then, not with the quiet admiration he'd shown before, but with something deeper, something that lived in the space between fear and hope. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "if broken people can really make something that lasts?" Wes didn't answer right away. He pulled a small object from his coat pocket and held it out to her. It was a locket, worn, tarnished, but clearly cared for. "I've carried this since the war," he said. "Found it in a burned-out farmhouse." There was a letter inside. A woman writing to her husband, telling him not to lose himself, not to forget why he came home. Lila opened the locket. The letter was gone, but a piece of ribbon remained inside, faded to pale gray. "I used to look at this and think I didn't deserve what that man had," Wes continued. "That I'd lost the right to be loved after what I'd done." He leaned forward, his eyes steady. "But maybe that's the thing we forget. Love isn't something you earn. It's something you choose to carry. Through fire, through blood, through everything." Lila clutched the locket to her chest. "Why give it to me?" "Because you carried me through hell," he said. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost." They sat close then, knees touching, hands finding each other with ease. There was no need for anything more. In that moment, under the stars and beside the dying fire, they were exactly who they needed to be. The next morning, they crossed into a town called Bitter Run. Small, dust-choked, half asleep. But it had a sheriff, a general store, and a chapel, whose bell had long since rusted into silence. Wes went straight to the jailhouse and turned in the two outlaws. The sheriff, a grizzled man with thick fingers and a sharp eye, raised an eyebrow when he saw Wes's face. "I heard of you," he said. "Calder, right? Thought you were dead." "Been trying to be," Wes replied. The sheriff nodded once, then looked at Lila, who stood just behind. He didn't ask about her scars. Didn't ask anything at all. "You'll be staying in town, then?" the sheriff asked. Wes looked at Lila. She nodded, slowly. "We might." They found a room above the store. It had one bed, a basin, and a view of the dusty street. That night, Lila sat by the window while Wes cleaned his rifle. She could hear the faint sound of music drifting from the saloon down the road. It was clumsy and off-key, but oddly comforting. "You ever think we'll be done running?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "But maybe we can learn to walk without looking back." She smiled. "That sounds like a start." In the weeks that followed, the townsfolk began to accept them. Not all at once, not completely, but enough. Lila helped the preacher's wife sew curtains for the chapel. Wes took work repairing fences and hauling supplies. People watched them, whispered about them, but no one dared mock them. Not when Wes looked at her like that. Not when Lila walked with her head held high. One afternoon, a child approached her at the well. A girl with messy braids and missing teeth. She tugged at Lila's skirt. "Are you a princess?" the girl asked. Lila smiled. "No." "You look like one," the girl said. "Like the ones who go through fire and come out magic." Lila knelt down, her voice soft. "Maybe I am, then." Wes watched from the doorway of the store, arms crossed, eyes crinkled at the corners. He didn't say anything when she returned to him, just pulled her close and kissed her forehead in time. They began to talk about the future, not as something feared, but something possible. They spoke of land, maybe a small house with a garden, of a life built slowly, one quiet day at a time. And in the evenings, when the world was hushed and the stars came out one by one, they would sit by the fire and remember. Not with sorrow, but with strength. They had both been left behind once, had both been broken. But together, they'd found something unexpected in the wreckage. Love, not the perfect kind, but the kind that stays. The kind that knows every scar, and chooses to stay anyway. The thing they thought they'd lost, and in finding it, they found themselves.